In my earlier videos, which are no longer up unfortunately, I always alluded to the disco genre. This genre of music took the world by storm. It originated with teens who were raised in some of the most impoverished areas in New York City and Philadelphia. It was a movement created by people who considered themselves to be outcasts in the cities that they reside in. Disco gave us legendary recording artists, fashion acceptance, countless disco clubs, Macho Men, Studio 54, and disco television specials. And we can't overlook what started happening to people. I would call it vanity, which was depicted in the movie Saturday Night Fever. This was a fun and lively genre. Many recording artists who came along before this genre didn't want to be labeled as disco artists. Maybe some of them had a glimpse into the future. This genre didn't take long to catch on. Within 4 or 5 years, it took the world by storm. We will explore why people felt as if this genre of music had to end, and why there was a large number of artists who didn't want to be associated with disco, and a large number who did. This story will also explain how people are programmed to move on so easily. Welcome to the House of Nostalgia, where we discuss all forms of entertainment from our past and sometimes even our present. If you like this type of content, please leave us a like, share the video, and subscribe to the channel. And thank you in advance. During the late 60s, there were a movement of different forms of music coming to life. We had the Philadelphia soul sound that was brought to us by Kenneth Gamble and Leon Huff. We had young boys standing out on street corners in different boroughs of New York City using spoken word, rhyming, and perfecting a dance that would be known as breakdancing, which inspired DJ Kool Herc to start the movement of what we now call hip-hop. Then we have the other teens, who were Black, Latino, and Italian Americans, and some from the gay community, who were into fashion, style, and dance. A lot of these teens had something more in mind than just the black ballroom scene, which was beginning to take shape starting with the House of LaBeija. These ballrooms were open to the world in the early 90s thanks to the groundbreaking documentary Paris is Burning, which was directed by Jeannie Livingston. The title disco is derived from the word discotheque, which is French for dance clubs. These underground dance clubs were mostly patronized by Black, Latino, and Italian Americans, and the music that was being played was mostly R&B. These nightclubs started getting recognition from DJs who started advertising these clubs through word of mouth and passing out flyers, putting up posters in neighborhood stores, advertising on street lights and public transportation. By the early 70s, these clubs started getting a facelift, so to speak. People were beginning to come out to these nightclubs to check out this new nightclub scene. The only problem was that many young people with money weren't interested in the underground scene that was labeled dangerous. Clubs started opening up in Manhattan and the better parts of New York City. Philadelphia and other cities followed suit. The music began to change from R&B to a more thumping, beat-driven, synthesized light show. And the music was no joke. It would keep you on your feet with maybe one slow song throughout the night just so you can catch your breath. By 1974, Barry White took the lead in adding disco to his long list of genres with the disco song Can't Get Enough of Your Love, Babe. I wouldn't say this was the first disco song, but it most definitely opened the door for other funk and R&B artists to follow suit. But he didn't stay, he moved on. This song had its very own dance, and so did Do the Hustle by Van McCoy in 1975. By this time, people were looking their best and creating their best dance moves. Disco was on fire. We had so many artists to pop out during the disco craze, it was ridiculous. It had to be over 1,000 singers and bands recording disco music all over the world. Even the 70s adult star Marilyn Chambers had a disco song, Benihana, in 1977. Most well-known funk, pop, and R&B recording artists made a song or two and moved on. Who would blame them? This genre was red hot. No matter what you put out, it was going to make money. Even the record labels felt that it would be a good idea to make at least one disco song. The reason why these entertainers chose not to stay in this genre too long was because it was becoming oversaturated. You had the new artists who didn't care. They just wanted a hit. They had no idea this music was going to become harder and harder to stand out. But the artists that were around for a while wanted no part of that. Donna Adrienne Gaines, who changed her name to Donna Summer in 1974, appeared on the scene in 1976 with an extra long erotic disco hit, Love to Love You Babe. The 12-inch disco single started flying off the shelves. Summer became the female face of disco, and she didn't disappoint. She stayed on the top of disco until the end. Donna Summer's career couldn't survive the end of disco. She was too associated with the genre for people to accept her singing anything else. Years later, before her death, Summer's career was showing signs of a comeback. I chose Sylvester James Jr. We knew him as just Sylvester, as the king of disco. His career started in the early 70s. At one time in his early career, the Pointer Sisters was his backup singers. Disco was made for Sylvester. He was going to be himself regardless. But disco gave the LGBTQ community the ability to be themselves. His disco career took off with his background singers, the Two Tons of Fun, which they later changed to the Weather Girls. Sylvester's career was never the same after the end of disco. He passed away in 1988. Disco was already in full swing when the movie Saturday Night Fever was released in 1977. It was directed by John Badham and made John Travolta a movie star. His dance moves were smoking hot. The movie was made to capitalize on the success of the disco movement. It showed the dancing, fashions, narcissism, and exclusion of what disco was starting to become. Now, when I say exclusion, that was more like your overall look. The best thing about the movie to me, besides Travolta, was the soundtrack that went 16 times platinum and introduced the United States to the British band members Barry, Robin, and Maurice Gibb, known as the Bee Gees. Gloria Gaynor started her music career in the mid-60s with the soul and R&B band the Soul Satisfiers. Some of her biggest hits were cover songs of Michael Jackson, and the Four Tops sung Her Way. In 1978, she released a song that related to women in the LGBTQ community called I Will Survive. People played and performed that song during karaoke for at least 20 years after it was recorded. I Will Survive was her biggest song to this day. Going into the late 70s, disco was being drained of all its worth. For the young neighborhood adults who created this genre, nobody knew where it started or even cared. It was all about money, narcissism, exclusion, and excess. Steve Rubel and Eon Schrager are two entrepreneurs who came together to capitalize on the success of the disco craze and open a disco club named Studio 54. The two college friends converted a former CBS television studio into a nightclub, adding disco lighting and a dance floor. Another thing is that this nightclub was open in an area considered the red light district, and it fit perfectly. This nightclub opened its doors in April of 1977 to the who's who in the industry. Getting into this club depends on your level of celebrity and who you were associated with, basically who you knew or worked for. The gossip you would read in the tabloids going on in this nightclub for the rich and famous was insane. Bianca Jagger riding a horse in the club, alleged open drug use, alleged open sexual acts in the basement or hallways, and alleged celebrity children seen partying with their parents. The tabloids painted a picture to the public of homosexuality, drugs, open sex, and children. In less than a year, this club made $7 million. On December the 14th, 1978, Studio 54 was raided after Rubel was quoted as saying that only the mafia made more money than the club brought in. This statement caused the IRS to raid the club, and they were later charged with tax evasion and obstruction of justice. A lot of evidence allegedly found in the club to prove that they were skimming unreported money off the top. By 1980, Studio 54 was closed, and both men were sent off to prison for a 3.5-year bid, but they only had to do half of their time. On Thursday, July 12, 1979, at Kaminsky Park in Chicago, Illinois, Steve Dahl, Chicago radio personality, shock jock, and anti-disco campaigner, was there along with 50,000 people, and 15,000 more had to be turned away. They were there to watch the game between the Chicago White Sox and the Detroit Tigers. This was advertised as Disco Demolition Night, a 2-for-1. They blew up thousands of disco memorabilia, albums, tapes, books, and VHS tapes. No one was hurt, but the damage from the field caused the White Sox to forfeit the second game to the Tigers. The way the people act on the field that day was just as bad as they felt about disco. After this, people were wearing t-shirts saying disco sucks. If any DJ played disco music, people would protest the radio station. This was the first time in history that people were successful in taking down a genre of music. They tried with rock and roll and later rap, and they failed. Disco no longer represented anything good or fun. The powers that be started associating everything they saw as bad with disco. A drug starting with the letter C started turning people in the urban communities into zombies. HIV/AIDS was starting to build up steam in the United States. Fear was beginning to set in the country, and people were reporting it as a homosexual disease. Since the LGBTQ community was welcome in the disco era, they took a big hit and started to be blamed for everything. People didn't know that this disease didn't care about your sexuality. At that time, if you got it, you were dead within a year. It got so bad that a lot of people from their community started hiding their sexuality all over again. Unfortunately, we were in the just say no about everything era. I love disco. but it ended up getting a bad reputation, and that was planned. I quickly moved on to house music and got more into rap. I remember Run DMC was starting to take over in 1984. By this time, I had graduated from high school with an uncertain future. How we move on so quickly. We replace one thing with another and forget what we had. I didn't give disco another thought until I started making these videos 40 years later. And why would I? Life moves on. People have disco-themed parties, and some people even try to bring it back again, not realizing you can never bring it back. I am proud to say that I got to experience one of the most exciting genres of music that was destroyed, and we will never have it like we had it ever again. Well wishes to you all, and thank you all for watching the video.